The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, invested in the story of delivering quality healthcare through the recent Lenmed Private Healthcare Group's deal. ABSA is a registered FSP. Well, nice to have Warren Ingram, of course, the registered financial planner, co-founder of Galileo Capital, back on the program. Warren, good evening. It's a very important time, you say, to spring clean your finances. It is the start of spring. It's also, because there's been so much talk about it, the start of the two-part pension system. I can't really think of a better time to have a look at it all.
Absolutely, Stephen. And I think, last week we spoke a little bit about that two-part, and I think I definitely got on my soapbox to beg and plead people not to attach their retirement fund savings unless they really absolutely had to. And anecdotally, I hear quite a few retirement fund websites were crashing on the first day of the week, this week, with people trying to access their money online. So unfortunately, it seems like it's a bit of a trend that people are going to try and access that money, even though we're telling them not to. So I really hope it's for the right reason. But okay, back onto the right topic, Stephen. And I think it always makes sense when you're looking after your broader personal finances to do a good health check at least once a year. Somewhere along the line, you need to stop and say, I had a plan. It's time to just stop and check that everything's going okay. And it is spring. It's a good time to do it. It gives us a bit of energy when the sun is shining. And I think the first thing you want to do is just take stock of what you decided a year ago and look at where you are now. So if you decided a year ago that you were going to save a bit more, spend a bit less, you were going to just rejig your investments a little bit to make sure that they were appropriate for you. Have you done those things, and is it working according to plan? If it's not, then it's time just to review why you made those decisions then, why it's not on track now, and then decide what can you do about it for the year ahead. Because I think a lot of people make great plans, but if they do nothing about those plans, that's all they ever will be, is a great piece of paper sitting on a desk or a great spreadsheet on a computer.
You have a few things obviously to sort of run through, and the first is your budget.
Yeah, so it's always a boring one. I can just almost hear people's eyes rolling up in their heads when I talk about a budget. But I think it's a critical thing to understand. We all know how much is coming in at the beginning of the month or at the end of the month, but we don't often track how much is going out, and most importantly, where it's going. And so a lot of people, they'll just start the month with money in the bank account, and somewhere along the month the money runs out, and they don't really have an idea of why or where or what they're doing. So have a look at what your expenses have been. There are quite a few very good apps that you can look at that will help you track what you've actually spent your money on, and just get a bit of insight into what your spending habits are, and have a look at the necessary and the unnecessary expenses. A lot of the time, we don't even know that we're still subscribing for a streaming service, or subscribing to some kind of a magazine or subscription or podcast series or whatever it is that we no longer listen to, but we're still paying for it. So check those and make sure that what you're paying for you're still using, and try and cancel as much of those subscriptions as you can, and then just look at your expenses. If you are running out of money before the end of the month, every single month, you're going to have to make a change, and look at the things where you're spending maybe a bit too much on going out, or a bit too much on the fun stuff, and not enough on the serious stuff, and see where you can make a small set of adjustments without getting to the point where you have to stay at home, every day of the month, because you have got no money to spend on return on life, return on fun stuff, because that's not going to get you anywhere.
And insurance, I was a little surprised to see that you mentioned insurance. Presumably you're not suggesting we cancel it.
No, please don't do that. So I think there are a couple of forms of insurance. The one is you need to look at your insurance on your stuff. So whether it's the stuff in your house, whether it's your car that gets you to work every day, all of those goods. And it's really good discipline and good practice to get a quote on your insurance at least every 2 or 3 years. If you've got the discipline and the energy to get a quote every year, is even better. Because very often you'll find that you can get a better price for example, your car insurance, or if you've moved house and you've moved into a safer area or something like that, make sure that you're still paying, the correct level, and hopefully, if you do shop around, that you can get a better rate on your insurance. But whatever you do, I'm in no way saying that if you've got a budgeting problem that you cancel your insurance, because that's a surefire way to disaster. So the first one is around your stuff, and then the second one is around your health and your ability to earn an income. So if you've got financial dependents, make sure that you have got insurance to look after them if you die. And secondly, you need to ensure your ability to earn an income. So we're talking about things like disability insurance or income protection. And again, shopping around for those forms of insurance, if you get a couple of different quotes, and I always want to play these insurance agents off against each other. So if I'm going to get 3 quotes, I tell each of those companies that I'm talking to that I'm going to get quotes, and I ask them to compare the quotes and tell me why their cover is better and why I'm paying what I'm paying. And very often you end up with a very good idea of whether you're well insured or not, and whether you're paying appropriately for your insurance. But the one thing, and it's a really key point, I know I'm repeating myself, is when times are tough, don't do things like cancel your car insurance and think that you're being really clever to save money, because when you've got, when you're driving on the road and you have an accident, and let's say you drive into some politician's really expensive car, just understand, if you cause the accident, you're liable for your car and their car, and you're in deep trouble if you've got no insurance. So you have to make sure that you've got insurance. And then lastly, make sure you've got at least a hospital plan. You don't want to be stuck, in a government hospital waiting for help if you can afford to get proper healthcare.
And I mean, the thing about insurance is one of those things that makes you sleep at night, and investing in sleep is a good thing.
Exactly right. If we get enough sleep and we're feeling relaxed, it allows us to make much better decisions all the time.
You also suggest that we should take this moment of spring cleaning, having a look through our finances, sort of looking at it again, to update our financial goals.
Yeah, I think we don't often do this. We kind of get up in the morning, get going, and we go week to week, month to month, year to year. And the question here is, do you actually have a good idea of where you're going financially? And that ties into your career, and exactly why you're doing all of this stuff. Why are you working so hard? Is it just to pay the bills every month? Is that the sole reason you've got, or is there a kind of a bit more meaningful purpose for the way you work and what you're working towards? So very often, if we want to make big financial goals, we have to find the motivation to do that. And for some people, that will be, the drive to kind of provide for their family, or provide a great education or a safe home for their children. And for other people, it might be something totally different, where they want to leave a legacy, for an education charity, or they want to, raise money to put, kids through school, or, animal welfare, whatever it is. So finding out why you're doing things, and kind of just reassessing that, and making sure that once you've got a clear idea of your goals, how does your plan align with those goals? Are you motivated enough to make the necessary trade-offs, to not overspend on clothes or holidays or eating out or whatever it is, because you've got goals that are really meaningful to you? So I know it sounds like real motivational speaker stuff, Stephen, but if we don't find a really big reason why we're working towards these things, life just trundles along, and we don't really make the necessary sacrifices to get there.
And I suppose it's not a bad thing to almost force ourselves from time to time to look at what our goals actually are, because they might change. I mean, your life can change. It can change quite quickly. You can meet someone or something, and you suddenly change your goals. You don't really sit down and think about, well, now I need to change my finances as well.
That's exactly right. Very often, you have a big life event. So, someone dies, or you have a baby, or you get married, or you get divorced, or whatever the deal is, and you kind of spend so much time just dealing with that, and the emotional impact of all of that stuff, that you don't revisit your goals, and then most importantly, how have these big life changes impacted your goals? Does it change the way you think and save and all of those things? So you might now need to save for 2 people, or you might need to just save for 1, whatever that means, and then finding new sets of motivation to drive you to reach your goals. And I think the important point here is, I'm not just saying save for retirement. It's such a meaningless concept for a lot of people. because they think retirement is something that happens in decades' time. So it's finding those shorter term goals, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 years away, and working towards those. And if you do a series of short term goals, it's amazing how you can make enormous progress.
Investments. You obviously need to look at those. Is that something you need to make changes to? How would you, when you start with investments, when you start to review your investments, what do you look for?
I think it's understanding that investing by design and by definition is a long-term thing. So I'm not saying that you should be chopping and changing your investments on a regular basis. But what will happen is that the markets move your investments in a direction, and most particularly right now, we're sitting in an environment where if you've been a long-term investor as a South African for the last 5 years, it's been pretty easy to know that what's happened is the JSE's gone nowhere. Your overseas investments have done well in hard currency, and the rand's been falling out of bed, consistently. However, if you just stop and look at what's happened over the last 12 months, that story is no longer true. Actually, the rand is quite a bit stronger. The JSE is doing well. Yes, international markets are still doing well, but all of a sudden you might find you're in a position where you're holding a lot more shares, for example, equities as a type of asset, and not enough cash or not enough bonds or not enough property, and in a situation like that, your whole investment balance might be completely misaligned. So the situation here is not to say chop and change just based on predictions or what we think is going to happen in the next few weeks when interest rates are changed in the US or whatever the deal is. This is about looking at your position and saying, if you think that over long periods of time, you should have 65% in shares, that's a good balance. What is your position today? Is it sitting at 85 or 95%? Because if it is, you're completely misaligned with your risk tolerance and your goals, and maybe you need to reset and just get your balance right. So I think that's the key point here, is just make sure everything's in line. You don't need to do that every month or every quarter. I think once a year is plenty, and maybe this is the time to do it.
And then your will, you need to have a look at your will as well. That shouldn't change too often.
It shouldn't change too often, but it's amazing how infrequently people look at wills, and even more scary, how few people actually have a will. So again, we've spoken a little bit about life events already, but this is the key point here. If you've you got married, you've got divorced, you've had a child, or you've lost a child, or whatever it may be, you might find that a heck of a lot has happened in your life, and you might have a will that still nominates your now ex spouse as the beneficiary of your entire estate, and that might be the very last thing you want to do. Equally, if you've got remarried, that you need to make sure that your new spouse is in the will. So it's just making sure that your will still aligns with actually what's happened in your life, and that the right people are in the will. Equally, that the right people are also out of your will, and just making sure that it's all neat and tidy.
And then your financial documents, you need to make sure that they're orderly. You need to make sure someone understands them in case the worst happens.
I can't tell you how often this happens. Someone dies, and the people that are left behind can't find everything. They can't find the will. They can't find the deeds to the house if the house is paid off. They don't know whether the person has retirement funds or investments, etc., etc. And yes, we are now hopefully living in a digital age, but it's just making sure that all of that stuff is correctly filed, and that somebody that you trust knows where all of that stuff is. In the old days, that would have been a filing cabinet somewhere that you locked away and you told someone where the keys were. And nowadays, it's the digital version of that. It's making sure that somebody that that you believe in and that you trust can help your loved ones find out where everything is, so that they can start the process of winding up your estate, etc. And that could equally apply if you had an accident, for example, and you're still alive, but you're not in a position to look after yourself for a while. Who knows where everything is, so that they can help you when you can't help yourself. So again, just making sure that everything is put together in one place, and that at least one person knows where all of that stuff is.
I would think also nowadays, you also need to make sure that someone has whatever passwords are needed to access these documents. A lot of them are held electronically.
It's such a good point now, and especially with things like social media accounts. A lot of the time you'll see someone's died, and people are still posting to their social media account saying, "Hey, let's go grab a meal sometime," and actually no one's able to post on that account to say, "I'm sorry, he's died." So I think that making sure that someone has access to all that, including the passwords, is important. But I know the online security people, the data security people, are going to be going crazy because they're saying you must never give your passwords away. So even if you keep your passwords in one secure place and you share that, all of that in one locked, secure document that someone else has access to, by all means do that. But just make sure that that all of that stuff is available to someone you trust. Clearly. It does need to be someone that that will look after your data and protect it the way you would.
We're speaking to Warren Ingram, the co-founder of Galileo Capital. Personal finance, of course, on The Money Show, how to spring clean your finances once a year. And we do have a question, Warren. It comes from Gregory. He says, hi, everyone. I've always considered my house an investment. I intentionally bought a big family home to use while my kids were growing up. I plan to sell it and downsize in the future. I do have other investments for retirement, and I'll add some of the proceeds from my house to my investment portfolio. When is the right time to downsize? I'm unsure about the timing. Should I do it before or after I retire, or when I'm much older? And I suppose it might depend on the property market. Greg, we'll have an answer for you from Warren in a couple of minutes.
The Money Show. Personal finance with Warren Ingram.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, invested in the story of delivering quality healthcare through the recent Lenmed Private Healthcare Group's deal. Absa is a registered FSB. Warren Ingram, of course, personal finance, with us on The Money Show tonight. And Warren, before the break, Gregory had a question for you. He wanted to know when he should sell his house and add that to his investments. Should he do it before or after he retires? Should he do it when he's much older? And I can't help but wonder if it may depend on the value of the house and what the property market is doing as well.
It's a good point, Stephen, around the state of the property market. I think we need to understand that South Africa is such a big country that it's impossible to look at the entire country and say that the housing market is the same everywhere. So there will be regions that are doing particularly well, and then there'll be regions that are really struggling. So it's difficult to find kind of a buyer for a big high value house in the northern suburbs of Joburg right now, whereas in Cape Town that's an easy job. So I think it will be key to understand that property market that Gregory's in, and has it been performing well? Because if it has, then I think that is a key factor. So it's the one, and then secondly, the economic situation of the country right now is important, because we are in an environment where inflation has probably peaked and is going down. I hate to tempt fate because it might just turn around some time, but let's assume that trend continues. If that is the case, it means interest rates are going to start coming down, and declining interest rates are a very good thing for property markets. So there could be some optimism around the corner for the property market. I think it will still take a while. So I think understanding the local property market that Gregory is in is important, and then secondly, that a little bit of time might need to pass for falling interest rates to have a very positive impact on the whole country and all property buyers. But then to Gregory's situation in particular, I think you don't want to leave this very late in life. I think a lot of the time people want to stay in the same house for long periods of time. And as we get older, dealing with change becomes much harder. It's very difficult when you're in your late 70s or early 80s to actually move and to decide on a new house. That change becomes very difficult physically, but also emotionally traumatic. So I would want to do that much earlier in life, and doing it when your kids are comfortably out of the house. In other words, they are actually working and funding themselves, and they're not at varsity and about to come back because they can't get a job. So just making sure that they really are on their own feet and looking after themselves would be a very good time. And doing it on the front foot makes sense. And then, equally, if it is a big house and there are only two of you, it means that your running costs are much higher than they need to be. Big houses, just by definition, cost you a lot more in maintenance. You might need to pay a lot more in services to get the property looked after and maintained, etc. And keeping it clean is a mission, and all of those things. So I think there, moving to a smaller house that becomes much more cost effective to run on a monthly basis is important. And especially if you're looking to move into a cheaper house, sometimes smaller isn't cheaper, but I think from Gregory's question, it does look like he wants to stay in a cheaper place. All of those costs are much lower. Your rates are much lower, all of that. So I would say, Gregory, when the kids are out the house and you and your wife are ready to do it on the front foot, then I would make the change sooner rather than later. The only reason to delay then would be that you're waiting for the property market in your area to turn, and you believe that will happen because interest rates are coming down or because positive developments have happened in your area, whatever those might be. There's new transport lines or new electricity availability or something like that.
I mean, I suppose also you want to keep your options open, and if you might find yourself in a position where you can't sell a property, and that would be the worst possible outcome for you.
100%, especially if you are financially then constrained and you're elderly and things are just difficult all around economically. That's the worst time. So I think doing it from the front foot as early as you can always makes sense.
And Warren, I mean, just to sort of allow you to get back on your soapbox, if you like. I mean, we saw the queues at the start of the two-pot system, and it seems to me that this shows you how desperate people are for money, and that means that a lot of people are going to have a lot less money to retire on. And I think in the end, that's a real indication of where we are at the moment as a country.
We are struggling, and I think it is important. I mean, just to give credit, that it does mean that a solid portion of retirement funds won't be accessible to anybody, even if they quit their jobs in future. And I think that's the one very big positive of the two-pot system is going forward, people won't be able to just resign, which is what they do now, to then access all of the money in their retirement fund. So we will be forcing retirement savings. So that is good. But yes, I think there are a lot of salary earners out there who are really struggling right now.
Warren Ingram, thanks very much indeed. Registered financial planner and, of course, co-founder of Galileo Capital with Personal Finance tonight. Really do appreciate the time and all about spring cleaning your finances.